Welcome to Pathways to Prosperity's 2025 virtual workshop series, which has now, as you've seen, become a regular PTP activity. Last year, which was the first time we held the series completely separate from the PTP National Conference, the series was very well attended, and that encouraged us to make this a regular part of PTP activities. As you can see today, the level of interest continues to grow. So as a reminder, for the next several months, on the second Tuesday of each month at 1 o'clock, we will hold a virtual workshop like the one today. Some of these will be led by the PTP standing committees. Others will be special workshops that provide in-depth information on promising practices with similar targeted outcomes aimed at specific high areas of need. And we hope you'll find all of our workshops informative and thought-provoking. Now, just before I turn things over to the moderator for today, Lisa Brunner, who is chair of the P2P Standing Committee on Student and Junior Scholar Engagement, I would like to acknowledge that I am today at Western University in London, Ontario, which is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, Lenape, and Chinookan nations, on lands connected with the Landon Township and Sombra Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. I'd also like to recognize the 3 First Nation communities that are neighbors of the City of London, which are the Chippewa of the Thames First Nation, Oneida Nation of the Thames, and Munsee Delaware Nation. Please consider the lands on which you reside and the Indigenous nations whose traditional territory they may be. And now, without further ado, I will turn things over to Lisa Brunner, who will be introducing today's workshop. Lisa.
Thank you so much, Vicki. It's a pleasure to be here and welcome to everyone. As you know, this workshop is exploring how Canadians are feeling about immigration today based on some fresh survey data from March 2025. We're also going to be examining the recent scapegoating of international students and its broader implications. And then finally, we'll hear about a community-based initiative working to shift public attitudes and celebrate migrants' contributions. First, we'll be hearing from Clement Nokos, who's the Director of Policy and Engagement at the Broadbent Institute and Editor-in-Chief of Perspectives, a Canadian journal of political economy and social democracy. With a background in federal policy analysis, international affairs, and progressive advocacy, he brings a political economist lens to questions of state market relations and their impact on social outcomes. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Yvonne Su, who's the director of the Center for Refugee Studies and assistant professor in the Department of Equity Studies at York University. She's a specialist in forced migration, climate change-induced displacement, and queer migration, and she has strong partnerships with local communities, NGOs, and policymakers. And then finally, we will hear from Huda Hussein, who is the project manager for the London and Middlesex Local Immigration Partnership, where she has worked for over 15 years. Her award-winning work focuses on identifying barriers, opportunities, and working with community from across different sectors. At the end of all 3 presentations, these amazing speakers are going to be available to take your questions, and we ask that you please use the Zoom Q&A function, which you should see at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you can't see it, you can click the More button, and it should be one of the options. So you can type your questions throughout the session, and you can also upvote other people's questions to help us decide which are the most popular. And then after all 3 speakers have given their talks, we'll answer those questions at the end. So without further ado, I'd like to first hand it over to Clement to kick things off. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. Yes, once again, my name is Clement Nokos, Director of Policy and Engagement at the Broadbent Institute, and Principal Researcher and Author of this report and presentation. Thank you all for attending this presentation of Shifting Views on Canada's Immigration Policy. It's based off a new joint research project between the Broadbent Institute and the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung from Germany, carried out in the field by our partners at Viewpoints Research in March 2025, conveniently on the eve of this federal election. So, this wasn't exactly a top-of-mind issue for voters, given the Trump tariffs being the issue really for debate during this last federal election. But we did think that given the political context, it would be an important opportunity to test these attitudes towards Canada's immigration policy during that highly charged political time. And so before we get started, the impetus to conduct this research project and the report, which you can find now on the Broadbent Institute's website, was to better understand the narrative behind seemingly anti-immigrant sentiment, which cropped up in the last few years, which also seems at odds with the multicultural immigrant communities that make up Canada. For our partners in Germany, this research seemed applicable given the rise of the Alternative für Deutschland party, which gained massively in the February federal election campaigning on anti-immigrant policies. And in Germany and across Europe, there are clearly racist undertones to a lot of the rhetoric espoused on immigration. But there's something unique in Canada where, you see this rhetoric also coming from newcomer communities themselves. If you visit the Broadbent Institute's YouTube channel, there's also a fascinating discussion from the recent Progress Summit held last April that I host between Canadian migration experts and Matthias Ecke, a German member of European Parliament representing the German Social Democratic Party, on the differences and similarities that he's observed in the tracks that Canada and Germany find themselves on immigration. So maybe food for thought. We don't want to get to a similarly German situation as Matthias warns. But given this apparent contradiction, to test this, we took an approach that was quite different from other recent surveys that looked at Canadian attitudes towards immigrants themselves, or surveys of immigrants and how they viewed their experiences in Canada. This research project instead focused on attitudes towards Canada's immigration policy, and in particular the system of migrant work and the relationship between Canada's economic system and immigration. And so opinions on Canada's long-standing approach to immigration policy appear to be changing, but Canada's cultural diversity, created by immigration policies that brought people from all over the world, has long been celebrated. In recent years, Canada's approach to immigration has been also the subject of social and political tensions. Alongside, and perhaps thanks to, growing economic pressures, opposition to immigration is returning after decades of growing public acceptance and support. We can point to the 1976 Immigration Act, which established the economic objectives of Canada's immigration policy in an environment where European immigration was slowing while demand for labor rose. The new policy under then Pierre Trudeau and his government, it opened up the immigration system, so to speak, allowing for family reunification to complement the points system that assessed contributions migrants had to Canadian economic activity. And this period also saw the definition of the refugee classification meeting international obligations. Canada's immigration policy was also followed by a multiculturalism policy embedded in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms by 1982 and the 1988 Canadian Multicultural Act. And I like to see these as complementary sets of legislation that are quite unique to Canada. You don't really see that in other comparable countries like Germany, the United States, or the UK. And in this complementarity, they've promoted economic growth through increased labor supply, facilitated by fairly strong human rights guarantees for newcomers of diverse backgrounds. And so with these fundamental pieces of legislation, they've contributed to the shape and size of Canadian society and the economy we have today. And you can see quite clearly here in chart 1, taken from the most recent wave of the World Values Survey, that Canada clearly differs from other comparable countries in its favourable attitudes towards immigration. Canadians overall, you can see clearly, have been much more receptive to immigrants than other similar countries. And you'll see it, in the real diversity as well. In 2021, immigrants comprised 23% of the Canadian population, while 27% were considered members of racialized communities. In the US, immigrants are approximately 14% of the population, in the UK, 17%, and in Germany, where attitudes are also very low in terms of favourability towards immigration, 19% of the population is comprised of immigrants. And so in Canada, we have more immigrants as a percentage of population while sustaining more positive attitudes in comparison to these other countries. But there have clearly been fissures and changes in recent years. And in particular, in recent decades, Canada's immigration system has grown to focus more and more on temporary, cheap labor rather than regular permanent immigration pathways. You see backlogs on the processing of immigration applications for permanent resident status, along with stringent requirements for economic class immigrant selection. And this has led to acute labor shortage in some key industries, such as healthcare or construction. With Canada experiencing relatively low unemployment through the 2010s, demand for the temporary foreign workers program grew, and employers began to build their business models around this particular migration pathway. To note, for others not maybe in the immigration field, to say that the temporary foreign worker program is an immigration pathway is a bit of a misnomer, not just for folks who don't have that experience in the immigration system, but for those even participating in the immigration system, some seeing it as a pathway given all the information and the economic opportunities that they perceive. And so this temporary foreign worker program was further restructured under the Stephen Harper government with an additional international mobility program that allows foreign nationals to enter Canada with a work permit where no labor market impact assessment is needed. With no incentive or regulation for employers to find domestic workers to fill vacancies through providing things like higher wages, providing benefits, unionized jobs, you see the use of the temporary foreign worker program grow. And it's become the faster and preferred way for employers to use immigration to Canada to meet long-term labor shortages. And so successive federal governments since that Stephen Harper era have done little to reform this program, despite mounting human rights abuses through the program, wage depression, and declining public support for immigration overall, due in part to this perceived increase in immigration, that with this rapid increase, more than doubling the number of people received through the temporary foreign worker program and its associated international mobility program. And so with that increase dramatically between 2011 and 2021, as employers, with declining to wages to hire more domestic workers, employers seek out more economic migrants to fill in these low-wage jobs. The post-2008 financial crisis also saw the deepening of other economic crises, such as the rise in the financialization of housing, cuts to funding for social services such as healthcare. Many of these industries or economic sectors, which involve a lot of the ability for Canada to take in more people from abroad. These economic issues were then exacerbated significantly by the COVID-19 pandemic. And so demands from certain business sectors, such as the service industry, called for a loosening of temporary foreign worker program rules to access cheap labor, using this post-COVID recovery as the reason. And though symptomatic of economic deficiencies that have led to the labor shortages and business practices that have led to the growth of the temporary foreign worker program, newcomers themselves have taken the brunt of the blame. And this has reversed trends in public opinion towards Canada's previously celebrated immigration policies. And so now turning to the data we received and sampled for earlier this March, overall sentiment on immigration still skews positively, but opinion is clearly divided. While more Canadians are likely to view immigration as having a positive impact than a negative one, nearly a quarter of Canadians today also feel neutral about immigration. Looking further into the crosstabs that you can also find in the full paper online, younger Canadians, adults up to age 39, having grown up with Canada's immigration and multiculturalism policies since their implementation through the 1980s, view immigration more positively at significantly higher rates compared to older Canadians. Though with higher educational attainment, those with higher educational attainment also have a much more positive perception than those with a high school level of education. And despite narratives that immigrants have a negative effect on jobs and wages, union members are much more aware of the positive impacts of immigration than non-union members. Again, you can see this in the crosstabs in the full report. But not surprisingly, those born abroad and those familiar with immigration also have a more positive view of immigration, despite a lot of that growing narrative and sentiment that immigrants themselves don't view more immigration as a positive thing. But, these divisions are still growing, and the fact that a fairly large segment of the population still feels neutral about the impact of immigration indicates an important shift, I think, in public attitudes towards Canada's immigration system. There's been a significant shift in favor of reducing immigration over the last year, more than a third at 38%, though nearly half of Canadians have maintained their opinions of immigration, and a smaller proportion, 13%, have shifted towards supporting higher levels of immigration. Higher levels of immigration are more likely to be supported again by younger generations, the highly educated, recent immigrants, and those familiar with education. And in contrast, where there may be more people, demographically speaking, those with lower educational attainment, those unfamiliar with immigration, are less likely to support immigration overall. And so Canadians have indicated a shift in support towards an immigration system that allows for fewer newcomers than the system does today. But a deeper analysis also provides more details on the rather positive view overall Canadians have towards immigration that superficially appears to contradict this trend. Recognizing Canada's economic weakness and the need for immigration to improve these economic indicators could also help to explain this inconsistency in attitudes towards Canada's immigration policies. And so, referring actually to a Broadbent Institute report from 2024, Dreams and Realities on the Home Front, Canadians Call for Government Action on Housing Affordability. You may have heard messaging actually from this report in this recent election, the idea of getting government back into the business of building affordable housing. This is also related very much to the attitudes towards immigration, like in testing for federal involvement in the housing crisis. Immigration is very much also a factor at play here when it comes to the housing crisis. And you see that attitudes towards immigration are very much affected in this data by the housing affordability crisis. In that report, most Canadians, 69%, agree with the idea that more immigrants increase demand and create more competition for Canada's unaffordable housing supply. Most also agree, 70%, that pausing some types of immigration is necessary until more housing supply is added and the family doctor shortage is resolved. But there's a funny contrast here, because at the same time, most Canadians, 2/3, are cognizant of the fact that immigration of skilled professionals is needed to address shortages of healthcare professionals and of the skilled workers needed to build housing. According to advocacy groups, for instance, thousands of internationally trained immigrant doctors already reside in Canada. They pass exams, meet requirements, but are unable to practice medicine due to a lack of medical residency placements. Recognizing this labor misallocation, I think Canadians remain supportive of immigrants needed in highly skilled workforces where there are shortages of workers. And you also see that almost half of Canadians have the view that immigrants and refugees are being unfairly scapegoated for Canada's housing and healthcare problems. And lastly, from this chart, while most Canadians see immigration as putting a strain on social programs, half also see immigration as necessary for keeping healthcare, education, and other social services sustainable. So attitudes towards the relationship between economic conditions and immigration are divergent. In the crosstabs, those 60 years old and older are significantly more likely to support putting a pause on immigration. until more housing is built and more doctors are hired. Meanwhile, younger people, those having immigrant family or have experienced immigration, those with graduate and professional degrees are significantly more likely to recognize immigrants and refugees as being scapegoated for the housing crisis. Non-union members are also significantly more likely to disagree with the idea that immigrants are inappropriately scapegoated for the housing crisis. So there are a few demographic variables at play here in terms of support or recognition of the value, the economic value that immigration brings to Canada. But taken together, I think Canadians do have this nuanced view of immigration. They see the roots of economic dysfunctions that are made worse by the expansion of programs like the Temporary Foreign Worker Program. They see the need for immigration to support our social services and fill gaps in highly skilled labor forces. But they also see the need for change to immigration policy while these gaps remain unfulfilled and services continue to be strained. Some do see immigrants as being unfairly scapegoated, such as those coming from the Temporary Foreign Workers Program, and believe that we should continue to welcome newcomers while fixing the housing crisis and healthcare labor shortfalls. However, the sentiment really is a wide desire for change from today's immigration policies, alongside a desire for solutions to fix the economic problems associated with immigration. And then when it comes to jobs, Canadians recognize the need for immigration to ensure Canada's economic sustainability. They're aware of the exploitation as well taking place through the Temporary Foreign Workers Program and agree that its continuation is unjust at 61% seeing it that way. At the same time, most Canadians, about 58%, agree with the view that immigration is necessary to fill labor shortages in key industries such as healthcare and home construction, as distinct from some of the industries that are staffed through the Temporary Foreign Worker Program. A little over half of Canadians also agree that immigration pushes wages lower and creates more competition for jobs. But interestingly, 1 in 5 of Canadians disagree with this statement. As many immigrants are streamed into low-paying work that Canadian workers traditionally avoid, given relatively stable demand in higher-paid sectors of the economy, Canadians may observe a race to the bottom on wages that largely affects foreign workers themselves. The residual effects of this wage suppression may also be felt in the struggles Canadian workers face in calling for increased wages as they catch up to the rapid inflationary episodes after the COVID-19 economic shock. Workers in general have a significantly more sympathetic view of immigration policies, suggesting that they don't view immigration and wage gains as a zero-sum game. You can have increased wages and an immigration system that works to fill in the gaps. And then significantly, unionized workers, 67%, are much more likely to see immigrants as important for filling labor shortages in key industries compared to Canadians who don't belong to a union, sitting at roughly 55% in support. Unionized workers are much more likely to see the value of immigration in growing Canada's workforce to keep social programs sustainable than non-unionized Canadians. And while union workers follow other trends in opinion on wage suppression and ending the Temporary Foreign Workers Program, they do see the necessity of immigration more than other groups of Canadians. Given this nuance, any appeal to labor unions on the issue of immigration should consider the majority view among members that immigration is necessary and focus on the economic issues lending to injustice and inefficiencies in the Canadian labor market's allocation of workers and skills, which these unionized workers likely recognize and encounter in their day-to-day jobs. And despite these changing opinions clearly on immigration policy, Canadians are still generally positive on how Canada's immigration and multiculturalism policies have contributed to Canada's economy and global leadership. More than half of Canadians agree that immigration has contributed positively to business activity, as well as Canada's global influence and international reputation. On the contribution of Canada's immigrants to multiculturalism, most Canadians do agree that cultural diversity can be a challenging issue, while a similar proportion also believe that immigration enriches cultural and social diversity. Among Canadians are also slight social divisions aligned with positive and negative views of Canada's immigration policy with regards to global leadership and multiculturalism. There is also strong agreement that immigration has contributed positively to Canada's global leadership, business, and cultural enrichment among younger people, highly educated respondents, union members, and among those familiar with the immigration system. Interestingly, there's also some nuance to consider in attitudes towards immigration and multiculturalism among newcomers. You can see this in the crosstab data in the report. I won't get into it more, but there is a recognition that among immigrant newcomers that, yes, there are significant challenges in integration, but that's not an untruth since this immigration system was first established. There's always going to be challenges, but just as much, respondents also celebrate at the end of the day the cultural diversity and social fabric that is brought about by Canada's immigration and multicultural policies. Lastly, these sentiments focusing on the economy are reflected in how Canadians prioritize their preferences for immigration pathways. Among respondents, there's a very strong preference for immigrants who possess skills that are highly in demand, like healthcare, engineering, and technology. Nearly half of Canadians would prioritize workers with high skill economic contributions. Family reunification is also a second priority for Canadians, but falls far short as a first priority compared to highly skilled workers. Refugees are also less of a priority, despite positive reflections on immigration's role in Canada's global influence. Least prioritized for Canadians are temporary foreign workers, business investors, and international students. Given the social issues exacerbated by employers seeking to exploit the temporary foreign worker program and international students to access low-wage labor, it's unsurprising that respondents do not see this immigration stream as a priority. But taken together, these findings indicate that Canadians do support immigration. However, they want Canada's immigration system to fulfill the economic objectives it was designed for, to support the development of a strong and prosperous Canadian economy, in which the benefits of immigration are shared across all regions of Canada, taken from the text of the 1976 Immigration Act. And so the findings of this report complicate the narrative that Canada is becoming uniformly less welcoming to immigrants, I think. While immigrants are feeling the same economic pressures that ordinary Canadian citizens are also facing every day. Familiarity with the immigrant experience tends to correlate with more support for immigrants themselves, as well as informed criticism of Canada's current immigration system for its role in exacerbating social and economic inequality. You know, another inspiration for this anecdotally for me is the experience of my own family, where, you know, my own folks came to this country. I was born here, but came to this country through very irregular means throughout the 1980s and established themselves as in that older generation. And then cousins of my generation now arriving in the past 5 years in this country. And just, you know, for both of them, for both of those generations, there's this experience that is clearly different in terms of economic opportunities and prosperity. While they do criticize the immigration system, they both do from different perspectives. There is still this celebration that, okay, Canada is still welcoming enough for them, good enough to, like the old saying of good enough to work, good enough to stay, is something that's still recognized anecdotally for me across generations. And so also what led me into investigating these questions further. We also see that the labor market shortages that immigration is supposed to fix are not being addressed by the current immigration system, an immigration system that does focus on increasing temporary foreign workers while leaving economic pathways for migrants with needed skills in the field, like care work, very much backlogged. Again, pointing to the backlog issues in family doctors and nurse and other healthcare workers. Today, the share of temporary foreign workers among all new economic residents has also increased dramatically from only 8% in 2000 to 49% of all newcomers by 2022. And given these issues, Canadians should understand that reform to the immigration system does not necessarily mean completely closing Canada off from migrants, though others might use this opportunity to say so. Immigration is still celebrated as a part of Canada's social fabric and multicultural society, while acknowledging its challenges. Canadians continue to support welcoming highly skilled immigrants to fulfill acute labor shortages. And in addition to housing decommodification, restoring and maintaining healthcare workforce levels, pushing back against wage suppression by empowering labor unions. Policymakers should reform the temporary foreign worker program to ensure Canadian jobs are fulfilled through the permanent immigration system. According to Richard Gilbert, a researcher for LiUNA Western Canada, looking at the construction industry out west, to him, this policy of reform should aim to stimulate economic growth, create employment, and generate tax revenue that sustains our social services and generates public investment through a workforce able to take on tough challenges like building infrastructure and expanding our healthcare system if the temporary foreign worker program, in his words, were to be abolished. And so through the leadership of labor unions alongside migrant rights advocates, Canadians desire a fix to the contradictions of the immigration system. And you see hurried immigration changes by the Liberal government. They came late in 2024 after a report by the UN Special Rapporteur on contemporary forms of slavery called out the program for its human rights abuses. And so a proposal I have and other advocates have is rather than listen exclusively to service industry business interests on their demands of the temporary foreign worker program, this next federal government, sworn in today, should consult with labor. It's kind of tough when they also did not appoint a minister of labor today. They also should prioritize economic sectors which do experience these labor shortages. And they should also be consulting with the migrant rights activists who've been on the front line looking for a real path forward on immigration that respects human rights while fixing Canada's economic gaps and inefficiencies. So changing Canada's temporary foreign worker programming and creating pathways to regularization would help to move this economic framework of the original immigration system, first proposed in the 1970s, to continue that forward and to help ensure to the best that it can in this system that with this broader human rights framework, that it ensures equality and justice for all that choose to make Canada their home. Thank you for attending this presentation. Hope I didn't run too long and looking forward to the following discussion. But first, I will hand it off to my colleague Yvonne Su from York University for their presentation on demonizing international students in Canada.
Hi, everybody, and thank you for your great presentation and the information. And I think it actually leads very well into my slide, especially in terms of Canada's quiet racism. So I am not an international student. But since I've been doing this work, I have been asked if I am an international student. And it's only based on what I look like. Truly. I get called by CBC reporters, and the first thing they ask me is, am I an international student? This is why I'm interested in this topic. Could that be the only reason I would be interested in this topic that impacts our country and over 1 million international students, and our policies are not great towards them? So just to kind of give you some evidence of Canada's weird relationship with immigration and racism. So I'm here to talk about the demonization of international students, which I think many of you have read about, heard, maybe experienced, or have seen in your own community. But I first want you to suspend reality and imagine you are 17, 18-year-old, you're in a community in India or China or the Philippines or Mexico. University has come to your community and said, come to Canada, right? The very famous study, work, stay in Canada. You've got professors, you've got people telling you Canada is a great place, safe, amazing education, good wages. You are painted a paradise, right? And again, study, work, stay. And there's a giant ticket price to this, right? And your parents are willing to sell their land, they're willing to ask relatives for money, they're willing to take out loans to fund your education. It's anxiety ridden, but you want to go because of this picture that is painted. And then you arrive and it's absolutely different. And again, you are a young person, likely have not traveled outside your country ever, and a significant amount of people have made promises to you. And then you read the news, and for almost every couple of days for 2 years, it was just non-stop attacks on international students. Out of control. This is Mark Miller, our former Minister of Immigration, after inviting you to a certain extent to come to their country, now saying the situation is out of control. You are out of control. You and your colleagues and your students and your friends, it's out of control. It needs to be contained. And you are called cash cows. You're not a student, you're not a young person, you are cash. And that is how the government treats you. Sounds very different than the story you were sold when they visited you and asked you for your money. And then not only are you out of control, you're also responsible for the housing shortages, right? And this is why they need to cap you, because you, this one person from a small village somewhere, and your other friends are responsible for Canada. The whole country, our whole nation's housing issues is your fault. Are there housing issues in Whitehorse? In Moose Jaw? In St. John's? I'm not sure. In Canmore, there are actually many places where housing is not a significant issue. This is a Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver issue. But we talk about it as a whole wide national Canadian issue. There's just no houses for anybody, which is absolutely not fair. And then to blame that on international students, a group of people who are essentially powerless, they don't have any voting power, they barely have any social power, definitely no cultural power. And this is how we scapegoat them, right? We demonize them. They're problematic, they're out of control. So then the cap comes, and it was devastating. It's a gigantic limit, and it is a very heavy-handed hammer to what they see as a problem that needs to be seriously controlled. But it doesn't account for who the bad actors are. It doesn't account for which regions of Canada might be more impacted. It is just a cap across the board, and it is rolled out quickly. There is not much consultation. It just happens. It needs to be controlled. And we need to keep in mind this was when Trudeau was in power and during a time when they did not want such a big scandal. They wanted to look like they were managing international students, immigration, migration. At the same time, this happens, right? This cap, this idea that things are out of control, immigration is out of control, leads to this. Does this look like America, or that like US, or does this look like Canada? Right? I think many people are shocked to see this. This is Jackson Square in Hamilton, mass deportations now. And this is a type of rhetoric that contributes to this type of action. And they mean it. And then this, which I think will surprise many people because they wouldn't have seen it. I don't know if you can see clearly, it's a little pixelated. It's a picture of every single country's flag. And then it says, stop the Indian invasion, keep Toronto multicultural. I have never seen multiculturalism used as a reason to exclude a certain group. And this is in Roncesvalles, in Toronto, a community that would argue that they're very multicultural, very diverse, very inclusive. And this is a poster. And look, you see, the whole pole is covered. And the reason is because there are some international colleges for international students there, and the community, or some people in the community, have been upset, and they're trying to use this complicated rhetoric that we need to keep multicultural Toronto by stopping Indian people from coming. So now, and it gets back home. So this is a article in the Indian Times, right? There's just a absolute nightmare of what it's not what they had imagined. It's not what they've been sold. And they're rightly upset, and people back home are rightly concerned. I have international students tell me that during this time when there are so many changes, anytime they saw the minister on TV, anytime they saw there was news on international students, they were frightened to open it, because they open it and some dramatic thing is going to happen. Their life is going to change forever. They won't be able to work them at the hours that they think they're going to work. They won't be able to to get the postgrad visa. Just so many changes. Now, here is the actual reality, right? These people who are causing Canada's widespread and national housing crisis, affordability crisis, they're sleeping in beds with strangers. This isn't Blog TO, but this is aimed at international students. This is not aimed at your average Torontonian. Sharing a bed with a stranger for $550 a month. Here's another one. Share a bed with a stranger because of Canada's affordability. How do I know this? Because if you Google Indian female in Kijiji, all of these targeted ads come up. Do it yourself. They might not be as prevalent because international students have had to move away because of these caps. Looking for a female roommate. It's mostly targeted at girls. It's very specific. They say stuff like, you're not allowed to use you're not allowed to use the kitchen at certain times. You're not allowed to bring any friends over. You can't make loud noises. Only vegetarians allowed. It's very restrictive. And again, quote unquote, Canadians would never even touch this, right? So these are targeted to international students who need to share a bed with a stranger or a room with a stranger because they can't afford things. These are not people causing the housing crisis, right? A mortgage is unthinkable. A $2,000 condo for themselves is unthinkable, right? Because all of their money has gone to tuition, which is 5 times higher than most domestic people, right? And this is such cash cow and such a great business that there were $37 billion in 2022 alone that international students brought in. 37 billion with a B. That is a huge industry, right? That we don't talk about. We don't talk about literal foreign bags of money that they're bringing, right? We just say they're causing problems, and here they are sharing bedrooms with other people. And again, you see, like, it's very specific. They only want Urdu, Hindu, Arabic, South Indian speaking, and you want them to share a room. And it's because they have no power, right? A landlord's going to be able to exploit you and tell you they're going to deport you if you're going to complain about sleeping in a bed with a stranger. There's more. Like, it's just go spend the time yourself if you want, but you will see this, and it's very targeted. And it's also because of racism and discrimination. I've had students tell me that they just cannot get replies from people. The second they say they're an international student, they won't get a reply. And there's a significant amount of discrimination. And again, these are the people you're telling me coming for your homes and fighting with you and causing a significant amount of housing issues. No, this is a long-standing issue. All of these are long-standing issues that have taken place in Canada because of poor policymaking. So stop blaming international students for this. And then, of course, we have the asylum situation. Mark Miller, alarming trend of more international students claiming asylum. He makes a big spectacle of this, that they're using backdoor ways to sneak into Canada to stay longer when their visa runs out. Spike in international student asylum claims on abuse of study permits. Now, again, this goes back to what was discussed earlier, because you notice there's an editor's note. I have rarely ever seen the Globe and Mail tweet before, Twitter kind of went not good. They never really tweeted editor's notes because this error was so bad. A previous version of this article included incorrect information, significantly overstating the increase in asylum claims significantly. The overall increase that they had originally quoted, sorry, it's in the way, over the past 5 years was 1,500%. The real number they said now is 646. What I want you to think about, imagine you are an editor at the paper of record in Canada, and somebody tells you that the amount of increase in the last 5 years was 1,500%, and you said, yeah, go ahead, publish it. Sounds good to me. They're terrible, right? No, fact check, triple check. This is an insane claim that you're putting out there. But in the context of anti-immigrant rhetoric, in the context that international students have been blamed for everything, this is like, great, awesome. It's increased significantly. They're causing all the problems. Makes perfect sense. No, so they've had to retract this. Now, the other embarrassing thing is, and this is because I'm an academic and I'm a little bit catty, is that I got the data, the exact same data that Globe and Mail used. And I don't know about you, but 2018 to 2023 inclusive is 6 years, not 5 years. This is very minor, but it just bothers me that we hate immigrants and international students so much that we cannot be bothered to check math. We cannot be bothered to think that saying that the increase was 1,500% is problematic, wrong, and should be handled with care. These are people. These are people we've invited to our country with the false promise of study, work, stay. And now we are treating them like crap, absolute crap. Now, based on these headlines, and I do want some suggestions in the chat, what percentage of international students who came from 2018 to 2023 did apply for asylum? Just pop it into the chat. Like I've given you some stats, I've given you what the minister has said, alarming trends. What percentage of all international students that came from 2018 to 2023 applied for asylum? Just put, no judgment, just put whatever number you can think of in your head. 3%, 2%, 1%, less than 10, 10, 5, 20, 22. I mean, you're very smart here. I think most people would have put higher, but I may have also framed it for you a little bit. 1%, guys. 1 freaking percent. No, seriously, let that sink in. I got the exact data the government has. And from 2024, in 2024, based on the data from 2018 to 2023, 23,970 asylum claims from international students came in. And there was 1.5 million study permits that were given. That's 1.5%. We can round up and say 2% if you want. But this is not alarming. This is not out of control. This is not what is the situation is being made out to be for the public, right? The public is not getting this 1% messaging. They're getting everything else. Now, the thing is that's really upsetting is that the government has all of this data. They have all of this information. They know who the bad actors are. So this is data I got from the government. I'm not making this up. I just take their data and I just look at it. These are the institutions, and these are the number of study permits they gave, and that's the asylum numbers, right? So you can have a percentage of the people that have applied, right? If you're the government and you want to crack down on this, why don't you just go talk to Seneca? Go talk to Conestoga and be like, hey guys, this is getting a bit out of control. What's going on? Why is there a disproportionate number of asylum claims coming from your university? This is the number, when you put it across these this trend of over time, right? Again, you see an increase, you see a spike. All the data is there for you to interrogate as a government. This is the university claims that are a percentage of the permit holders who apply for asylum, and this is the ones that are over 30%. So imagine you are the government making policy, and you have this data. It was not complicated. I just used Excel. And I added a couple of numbers together and I divided them. You have Canadian Technology College with 71% of their holders applying for asylum. That is problematic. You should probably talk to them, right? Look at this. This is all very obvious. And then I found that there were multiple institutions that had 100%. 10 study permits, 10 asylum claims, same year. It's not rocket science. You know who the bad actors are and go after them. Why are you blaming all of the international students that came? Why are you punishing all of the institutions that are here and now are suffering and cutting jobs, cutting programs, which awkwardly is actually going to impact domestic students as their level of education and their quality of education is going to go down? And then it gets worse. So this discourse continues. And now in November, right, after the caps, after the stuff, the Globe and Mail says there's a complete meltdown of the Canadian refugee system, and they blame international students. The new narrative is that international student asylum seekers are causing backlogs. So not only are applying, they're actually causing the whole system to be broken, right? So when I looked at the raw numbers, and again, the numbers have increased because the data I had was up until 2023, and now I have 2024 data, and it's gone up to 1.94% of the 1.7 million international students have claimed asylum. That is still very low. And of course, the flip side is that 98% of internationals did not apply for asylum, right? So we are using these really powerful discourses that arguably impact some of the 1.94% because we're making it seem like they're all fraudulent claims, which is also not true. And we're applying this to the 98% that have not applied for asylum. So I looked at the data again, because again, it is available. I'm looking at the exact same data as the government. I looked at the top 3 countries where asylum claims are being made in 2024, right? And I looked at, and while the Refugee Board database does not explain its decision, it just says acceptances and rejections. And that's really, that's important because even the acceptance and rejections give you a lot of data, a lot of information. And from 2021 to 2024, claims from Bangladesh were more often accepted than rejected. And the country has experienced a lot of democratic backsliding in recent years, and its government fully collapsed this like last summer. So after a popular uprising, a lot of people wanted to flee the country. And the other thing I wanted to get across with this data was that asylum claims get rejected, and they get rejected all the time. There is unfortunately a belief in Canada when you apply for asylum, you will get it and you will get our taxpayers' dollars. That is not true. We have a very rigorous program that many countries look up to and should be given more credit. So I'll just run you through some of the data. Asylum decisions, right? This is in India. You see that in 2022, there were more rejections in the red than acceptances. 2021, more rejections than acceptances. In 2023, there were more accepted than rejected, but you see it goes both ways. It's not just everybody gets accepted. And that's really important to get across. Nigeria, again, a lot of rejections as well. And there's also other. And then Bangladesh, there is more acceptances than rejections. And again, it's because of some things that are happening in the country. Now, I took all of them and I compared them. And this is the backlog of asylum claims, international student asylum claims, and study permits granted from 2018 to 2023. And you see the black is the study permits granted. So they're the biggest ones. That's a lot of study permits granted. The backlog is the blue. And international student claims is the red. Looking at this data, how are you telling me that the red is responsible for the backlog? Do you know what I mean? If we're a little kid, we were playing Lego and we stack 2018, 2019, 2022, 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, it doesn't make up the backlog, right? Come on. So these are extremely dangerous false narratives that are contributing to an extreme amount of hate, right? Now, how do we strengthen this system? You can penalize the bad actors. I just gave you a list of bad actors that you could have gone to, said that we're going to take your permission, your ability to have international students away, and get the bad guys and not impact everybody else. You can further enhance the IRCC checks. A couple of emails to say you have to verify that you've been accepted, right? That has contributed to finding 10,000 fraudulent letters. Let's just do more of that. You can expedite the asylum application for international students if you're really concerned, right? And have a fast track route for them to be able to prove that they face a well-founded fear of persecution. You can also add staffing so that this backlog can be cleared. You can better equip the students themselves. Why might some be resorting to this? Because some are, and that's a fact, but it doesn't mean you have to blow this out of proportion or say everybody is doing it. And you need to get a fuller picture. All of that data I showed you, it's available. The government has the same data, right? So please do the work and make better policies. And the reason I care so much about this is this. 4 international students in Regina just walking down the street, and they got Tim Hortons thrown at them, and they got told they were going to get shot. This is, and I'm getting chills. This is the Canada we are creating. People who get so angry and ID people walking down the street that coffee gets thrown at them and they get told they're going to get shot. For what? For listening to you, to study, to work, and to stay? This is the punishment they deserve? It's ridiculous. Okay, I'm done my rant. I'm obviously very passionate about this. But here I am, and please find me on LinkedIn, and you can send me an email if you want to continue this conversation further.
Thank you very much for that explanation, Yvonne and Clement. My name is Huda Hussein, and I'm the project manager for the London Middlesex Local Immigration Partnership, mouthful. In short, it is called the LMLIP. Next slide, please. We were established in 2009. We are called by the City of London here in Ontario and a community member. We are funded by the federal government through their immigration department. And we are here in London, Ontario. We are focusing on 5 issues that impede the integration of newcomers and immigrants. These 5 issues are the education, employment, health and well-being, inclusion, civic engagement, and settlement. Our mission, given all that I've heard today, but our mission still is to strengthen the role of the community in serving and integrating immigrants and creating a more welcoming community. Next slide, please. Creating a more welcoming communities after whatever we have heard today from Clement and from Yvonne, and what we have heard here in London also in the region, it's not an easy task. It's an uphill battle. And creating a more welcoming community is actually one of the major tasks of the local immigration partnerships, which are kind of indirect services created in 2008 in Ontario first, and then the model has gone across the country. We have seen that there is shift in public attitudes. Attitudes have been there forever, but they were kind of under the rugs somehow, and they were boldened in 2016. This is what has happened in the south end of the country. So the public attitudes have changed, and we have seen that there is now more negative attitudes towards immigration. We've heard concerns about continued public programs and that how they and the public programs that are support immigrants. Actually, just now also we have heard from Yvonne talking about how immigration was framed, how the newspapers are framing immigration as being the cause of all the problems and the international students of all the problems. We've heard this here too in London, Ontario. And that impacts our work, our ability to welcome and integrate and benefit from immigrants, because at the core of our job at the local immigration partnership is creating that kind of welcomability in the region. But how can we do that when we see there is shift in attitudes? We also have seen it here in London at the local level. We have seen people talk about people coming to steal our jobs, or people are dependent on social services, which are burden to this society. So out of this crucial, or rather grim reality, the Arm London campaign was created, and it was born. Now, it was born not only to correct misconceptions, but also to celebrate real people whose stories show the true fact of immigration in our community. We know that at LMLIP, we wanted to see these, how can we address these emerging negative attitudes? We know that the celebrating immigrants' success is necessary for community well-being. We also know, as some of you have already mentioned, that we do need talents. We need newcomers to stay and be welcomed for the benefit of all. And communities that embrace diversity are stronger. And by sharing these stories, we kind of prevent divisions when we share stories. And most importantly, personal stories change attitudes more effectively sometimes than statistics. For example, one compelling human story can shift perceptions where data cannot sometimes. The next slide, please. So when we talk about in 2013, looking at these shift ideas, and we also found out that the newcomers in London, Ontario feel that they were not welcomed, and at the same time, they feel that they have less opportunities of integration. They have limited opportunity because London is a smaller city. I mean, comparing to Toronto and Vancouver and Montreal. So we thought of having this kind of social media campaign, which was initially started for a month from July 1st to July 31st, where we just talk about these stories. We find out the stories of immigrants who chose London to be their home, and how we can celebrate those individuals. For 1 month, we will share their stories through social media. So, and we thought that this is a way of designing to improve attitudes by highlighting real stories of success stories. Because again, through stories, people may feel that they're connected, that they feel that these are the true phases of immigration. Next slide, please. So how do we do it? Again, we are only 3 paid staff, but we work with about 100 volunteers who do the work for us. Once we have an idea we bring on those team of volunteers who start to work on the issues. So every year, for example, the team will start working from April until June, until August, to kind of go through the whole spiel of activities, determine the relevant theme. What is the theme for this year? I'll come and talk about the theme later on. What could be the theme of this year? Who do we want? How can we nominate people? How can we get that information out? So we do develop nomination forms in English and French, and we open and promote the nomination. That's early in the year. Once the nominations are received, then the whole committee again gathers to select the winners based on the theme, based on the alignments that they have, the key alignment that they have put together. And they also want to ensure that proper representations regarding original countries and age, gender, and language. Next slide, please. So in the summer, as I said, we depend on volunteers who come together to do this project for us. And we do have interviewers, we have writers, we have photographers, we have videographers, and even we have media people who come to write the stories for us. So during the summer, the interviews will be recorded. Once the team is selected, once the faces of London, as we call them, are selected and their stories are, we start to dig into their stories. So they are recorded in the summer. So the volunteers will do all that work, all that background work. And then in the fall, we'll start the campaign by early September, where we profile the stories of each one per month, depending on how many we receive in that year. Usually we tend to receive about 10, but sometimes you get more than 10. So depending on how many we receive, if we receive 10, for example, we start in September and finish in December, at least two per month, where we share their stories. We also created a website for that purpose. If you're all interested, you can go to that website. You'll find out our own beginning from 2013. And one thing that I have not mentioned actually is that our I Am London has become a kind of project that was adapted by many local immigration partnerships across the country, not only in Ontario, but across the country, which is a good thing. I mean, this is a kind of a way to engage the communities at each level about immigration. These people come with a story, these people come with strength, these people come with assets, and we need to see those assets, we need to see those contributions, we need to see how we can work together, cohesion. I mean, at the end of the day, Canada was built by immigration, and immigrants. I mean, statistics will tell us this too. So in the fall, then we go back and talk about the campaign. We started this in September. We profile their stories, and then we also do some some video clips that we share in the social media. We are lucky enough this year that we have a position which is called the communication officer, and that person takes charge of creating some of the smaller videos, and he also leads that working group that deals with London. And then early in December, we have a celebration where we get the people who we call again the faces of London come with their families, with their friends, and we invite the whole community. Sometimes you get up to 200 people attending that event at the end of the celebration, and we celebrate together the stories that have been shared throughout the fall and winter. Next slide, please. With regard to the themes, I mean, as I said before, it depends. As the working group, think about the theme each year. What can the theme be? They respond to the community needs locally. What is happening at the local level? How can we create a theme that aligns with what is happening already in the city of London, for example? For example, in 2022, there was a tragedy that happened in 2021 here in London, where a family of 4 were annihilated just because of their fate. They were killed because of this. Now, to commemorate that tragedy, we wanted to share the stories of Muslims who built London, who are part and parcel of London. They celebrate their stories, whether they were doctors, whether they're nurses, teachers, or community persons. So we got their stories out there because the group has decided we want to focus on the Muslims who contributed to the diversity, to the economic, to the society in London and Middlesex. And last year, for example, they came up with an idea that we want to celebrate the artists among the immigrants. And we found artists who came in the 40s, artists who came in the 50s, as long as these people still identify themselves as immigrant, they are most welcome to come and join our sessions. And this year, this is new. The theme has just been selected, which is chose to stay. People who have come as maybe international students, or maybe they came as temporary residents, they got the permanent residency, or people who just came to check London, how it is, what are the amenities there, what can be done here for me and my family. And we found that, okay, there are a number of families, including myself. When I first came in with my husband and two girls, we thought that London, maybe let's check London. It's a smaller city. There is university. It's a kind of commuting from place to place is not that difficult. But we stayed. It's been about close to 30 years, and we stayed. So this is the story that we are going to share with the community this year. Chose to stay. Why and how? Next slide, please. So here are some of the personal stories, because personal stories do matter, as I said. It really creates that compelling, relate to the people who stay here. And then maybe some people will think about their own ancestry, how when they came here, some of us came. I mean, I was the first person to come in this generation, but my children were raised here. Maybe their children are now born here. So that's how it is. I mean, people came before us, people came many years ago, people will still come to London, to Canada. So these are the stories really matter. It creates that kind of bond. Next slide, please. In 2013, we celebrated our one decade of celebration, and it was well attended again. And by the way, we take space when we celebrate these events. As I said before, we are only 3 paid staff, and we work with a number of volunteers, and we work with the community at large. So it is the school boards that give us spaces, or the ethnic groups faith groups that give us the spaces to celebrate, or the City of London, they give us the space to celebrate without any financial contribution. Next slide, please. To bring those stories to life, how we do it? Through a number of channels. We have the social media platforms where we share the stories of these people with their images. We get, by the way, the consent from them that we share their stories. We have the video documentations that capture these testimonials. We have the celebration, and we give at the end of the day also a kind of a certificate to acknowledge their contribution to London and Middlesex. Next slide, please. Before I close here, I would think that every one of us has the power to change attitudes somehow, even if it is a smaller piece. Maybe at an individual level, you can look at it, ask a newcomer, which is in your own facility, and ask about their stories, but at the same time, you can share your stories and have that kind of interaction. At an organizational level, maybe we can spotlight a contribution of a person in that institution and share that in the communication. And then, because we do know that when we celebrate immigrant success, we are building the future of London or a region, a place where people choose to come and, more importantly, choose to stay. Next, please. These are the platforms that we have been using throughout to share the stories of our Faces of London. Thank you very much for your time. I go back now to Lisa, please.
Thank you so much to our 3 amazing speakers. This has been an incredibly informative panel, and I'm really grateful that you shared your time with us today to share these 3 very different and very complementary perspectives on this topic. It was awesome. We originally were planning to go until 15 past the hour. One of the speakers has to leave at 20 past the hour, so we're going to give a little bit more time to the speakers to answer a few questions. If you're okay to stay, you're able to listen. We have had some questions in the Q&A, and you can you can add some questions there. Clement has responded to 2 of those questions. So if you look at the answered questions, there's some answers there and some links, which are awesome. I think we'll ask one question to Yvonne first before she has to leave. And Yvonne, this is from anonymous participant who says post-secondary institutions are the responsibility of the provincial governments. Is there any province that has been handling the recruitment and education of international students more responsibly than Ontario? Have there been any private colleges that are reprimanded, audited, closed because of the mistreatment of international students?
So I don't know the answer to the first question because haven't looked at this, but also this is a large data set. And the answer to the second question is that they keep saying they will look into it, they have looked into it, but I personally don't know of any colleges or private universities or whatnot, these diploma mills that have been treated with criminal investigations or any type of extent. I think we would have heard about it in the news as well. They argue when they get pushed on that it takes too much resources. But I really doubt that it takes that many resources. Again, the data I showed you is the same data from the government, and you just ask them, why do you have 100% asylum application rate? Right. So the government just doesn't want to do that because they don't want to open up that can of worms, but also they don't want to admit their complacency, right? Or being complicit in letting this go on. So they'll just blame lack of resources.
Great, thank you so much. And Yvonne, we're going to ask one more question to you just to make sure that we have a chance because I know you have to leave. This wasn't directed at any particular speaker, so if the other speakers want to give some thoughts as well. But Yvonne, for you first, from Ricardo, how do we balance the image of Canada as a nation embracing diversity relative to the narratives that we see in other countries, like the US, like Australia, Ireland, countries in Europe? And I ask you this because I know you've worked and studied in a variety of countries. And I think Clement's presentation gave us some comparators, right? That Canada has a relatively positive perspective of immigration compared to other countries. So the question is, how do we balance that when we hear all these competing narratives from other jurisdictions?
I think we need to ask for politicians to stop forcing polarization on us, right? I do not want to look around at my fellow Canadians, and I do not want them looking at me and treating me for my skin color. It's absolutely terrible. In the last 3 years, I have been asked if I am an immigrant more often than I have, and I've been in Canada for more than 15 years. So it's this forced, like us versus them. It's this forced polarization, and of course, it's a distraction. If we're so focused on IDing each other and thinking other people of color are taking away our resources and what's Canadian and who's Canadian, then we're not looking at the bigger problem, which is, again, there's long-standing issues of funding when it comes to healthcare. There's long-standing issues of housing. We cannot build enough houses. Why? Let's solve that, right? And these are very, very challenging, wicked problems. I don't think any of us, and even if we spent, I don't know, 3 years sitting down trying to figure it out, housing is a really complicated issue. It needs money. It needs changes legislation. It needs capitalist developers not to be so capitalist, right? But they don't want to. That's so hard to deal with. It's so much easier to scapegoat people, right? But I think as voters, as citizens, we need to push back on them and just say stop. You're making us think the worst of people. You're making us fearful, right? I won't name a politician, but in the last election, we were told that there was high amount of crime across Canada. Yes, in Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, but every other piece of Canada is doing just fine. We don't need to make citizens feel they have to lock their doors when they already live in safe neighborhoods or like crouch their bags when somebody walks by. Like we live in Canada's very safe. We're not like America, but the narrative of crime works. So I think we need to push back on these politicians and ask them to stop scaring us, stop scapegoating immigrants, and stop asking us to put this lens on. I think that's of utmost importance.
Thank you. Okay, Clement, over to you. There's a question from an anonymous participant that says, I'm a frontline service provider for temporary foreign workers. What do you think is the best way to advocate for our clients in terms of policy change? There are huge systemic gaps that enable exploitations and fail these people when they reach out for help.
Yeah, so I'd like to address this question, but actually to go back to the previous one as well. I think to go back to the previous one first, that it was an interesting thing, and you'll also see this in the discussion I have from the Progress Summit last month with that German member of European Parliament, where the Syrian refugee crisis in Germany. This was also when I was doing grad school in Berlin, and what I saw firsthand too was during this Syrian refugee crisis in 2015. That, at the same time, to Yvonne's point about housing, that part of what was going on is part of that programming to accommodate Syrian refugees as a part of their Flüchtlingspolitik. They also had this Willkommenskultur that was necessary in order to facilitate, socially lubricate, I would like to say, some of the hesitancies that maybe Germans had with regards to an influx of 1 million refugees. Coming to Germany was to build housing. It wasn't great housing, it was temporary housing. It was also built to the remains, like in Berlin, anyways, and in the remains of a Nazi era airport in Tempelhofer. But what you saw there was the accommodation of people and building the infrastructure for those people to accommodate. And until more recent years, when there's been these struggles of integrating this refugee population into German society. They don't really have good experience doing that. So, of course, it failed years later. But initially, Angela Merkel, for instance, was celebrated for developing this sort of integrated housing policy that came in with new people coming to Germany. And then, for decades before that, there's this Gastarbeiter program that West Berlin also had that took in Turkish guest workers. They're not guest workers because they're still there today. But you'll also see in particular neighborhoods in Berlin, all of this housing that, they are criticized for being enclaves of just one particular ethnic community. At the same time, they built housing for people coming to that country. And so, there has been this coordination in government initiatives on that social infrastructure like housing and healthcare to accommodate immigrants. And, for, longer term that didn't work out because they didn't really want to sustain this sort of programming. But the initial way that things, played out harmoniously, I think, is something that could be replicated longer term and something that we should be trying to do in Canada to sustain this longer term. I think the advantage we also have in Canada is that multiculturalism policy. In Europe, in Australia, other countries of the world where there aren't, like there are exceptions in East Asia where there is some sort of multiculturalism policy, but in Canada, it is kind of unique as part of our I guess, social lubricant in sustaining immigration policy. So that's why I like to say that they're complementary. You don't really find this elsewhere. And so I think, if we are to put our money where our mouth is in those investments, in addition to having that multiculturalism policy, this is what is, where we're able to use Canada's image and that sort of balance that we haven't exactly pursued fully to realize the actual benefits of the full benefits of the original intent of the immigration policy. And, turning to frontline service providers for temporary foreign workers, I think this is where, a lot of the labor movement comes in. I know, there are a lot of folks, especially in UFCW Canada, that work with temporary temporary foreign workers in the agricultural sector, in particular, that come from Latin America to Canada, and they organize them. They tell them what their rights are in Canada. They tell them they have a point of contact if there are abuses in the program. And so this is also where you have frontline work happening in an organized fashion, being organized by labor unions. And I think it's sort of been neglected because there's been this, I suppose, a reputation that labor unions might be more standoffish against immigrants. That might be the case in other countries or in some particular sectors of the economy and some industrial sectors. But from what I've also seen is that labor unions are on the front lines doing this service provision to temporary foreign workers in particular industries. And I think that is worth expanding. I think that is also a way to, get that activism and policy change for, because, labor unions are a very, very strong force, not so much as strong as they once were in decades past, but there is this resurgence and this renewed interest in the labor movement in Canada and across the Western world. And I think that's an opportunity to join in solidarity with migrant rights activists to come together, because it all is labor policy, quite frankly. And if we can work together on that, I think this common front is more of a better mode of going for policy change than, fighting things from a migrants only perspective and from a labor union only perspective. They need to come together in order to force policy change.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that answer. We're going to close things off with one last question for Huda. And I think going on this topic of advocacy, you showed us a different type of advocacy, right? Through the work that the I Am London campaign is actually doing. There's a question from Colleen about what information do you include in your interviews in the I Am London campaign stories? And maybe I can add just if you could share, what do you think are the most convincing stories? What are the most moving and impactful stories that you've seen through your work in this area?
If I go back to the first question about the nomination, you said about nomination rate. Yeah. So when we do nominate I mean, we have the working group decide what do they need. First, they decide on the theme of the year, and based on the theme, they create their own nomination paperwork. They ask for the age. As I said, we wanted to make sure that we have got equal numbers in age, gender, countries of origin. So they ask those questions. At the age, when they ask about the age, for example, they say between 20 and 20, 30, 30 to 45, something on the, not very specific. These are the questions that is asked, and there they need to share their phone numbers and their email address so that they can be contacted when they're selected. And the themes that we have changed depending on the themes of the year, that is the most the stories have come in. For example, 2022, it was very much emotional in 2022 because of the theme that they have selected. It's about celebrating the Muslims. That was very impactful. People started talking about their own stories, about how they have been targeted, for example, just because of their skin color, because of what they wear and what they do. It was very powerful. And the other powerful stories that we got was last year with the artists coming from different forms. We've got the singers, we've got the one who created, for example, the first Olympic flag for someone outside, not in what do you call it? Forgot European name. I forgot that name. Bosnia, for example. So she came with that piece. That is the first piece that she had created for the Olympic when she was there 40 years ago in Bosnia. So the stories of the artists were very powerful, very impactful. People started talking about them, and we do have coverage, by the way, every year in the newspaper, local newspaper, whether it is the CBC or the local newspaper like Reuters and CTV. So hope I've answered that question.
Thank you so much, Huda. I think we could probably talk about this for a lot longer, but I know one of our speakers has to go. We are so grateful for everyone who came. There will be more Pathways to Prosperity workshops coming up. You can join the P2P newsletter if you're not already on it to get updates. You can also go to the P2P website and look at the events and see the next workshops coming up. Thank you all for your attendance, for staying a bit longer. Have a wonderful day and more soon to come. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.